fig tree down. It's not bearing any fruit.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. Disgrazia!
They will not allow Donald Trump to be president.
Joe Resinello, let me ask you a question.
I have a better chance of becoming president than Donald Trump.
I'd vote for you.
It's thrown around too liberally, hate speech. Just because your feelings are hurt doesn't mean it's hate speech. So there are issues here that cross political lines.
It means that your libtard friends are not going to invite you over for Grey Goose and Fog Wild.
If you think that America is about you, you're just fooled.
I got to show you something that has me aggravated. Joe Resinello, you and I say on the show all the time, they're serving it up for us as a big steak dinner. We can't help but to sink our teeth into this big ribeye that they're serving us because it's all over the place, and we're jumping right in today. Thank you for coming and visiting us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. We are going way in the breach tonight. Raymond Ibrahim is joining us tonight. We've had him on the show before, and we're happy to welcome him back. He's an expert in Islamic history and doctrine. He's an author of Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West. Also Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's New War on Christians, and the Al-Qaeda Reader. Raymond Ibrahim, welcome to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Welcome back, brother.
Hello, Joe and Joe. Good to be with you again.
All right. Thank you for coming on. Now, we're going to be discussing. Now, here's the thing, Ray. They all talk about misinformation, disinformation, all these words that they use. I'll be honest with you. I'm freaking confused about all the words and they use. Joe and I say the same thing all the time. We say, what the hell are you saying? Now, Justin Trudeau appoints a special advisor to fight against Islamophobia in Canada. However, at the same time, Christian churches and Catholic churches in particular are being burned down. Ray, we got to hash this out. Introduce our audience to this topic.
No problem, Joe. So, yeah, let's start with the word Islamophobia. The idea of Islamophobia, or the way it's bandied about, means basically an irrational fear or dislike of Islam. The true word, really, phobia is a Greek word, just means fear. So the real word Islamophobia, fear of Islam, is a real phenomenon, and it has been since the dawn of Islam, 14 centuries ago. Because if you're not a Muslim, you would do well to fear Islam. That's just the bottom line. This is a doctrinal and historical point. Doctrinally, Islam teaches hatred towards non-Muslims. Literally, it says you have to hate non-Muslims. I was watching a sheikh the other day in Arabic saying, you can marry a Christian or a Jewish woman, and you can enjoy her sexually, you can benefit from her, but you have to hate her in your heart because it's an ironclad doctrine in Islam. And then history, as in the book you mentioned in Sword and Scimitar, where I discussed 14 centuries, you will see that teaching manifested itself over and over and over again in this barrage on Western Christian civilization from the time of Muhammad up until the present. So definitely there is fear, rightfully so, of Islam and aversion. But the way they use it is to try to imply that this fear just came out of you're just crazy, you're irrational. There's nothing problematic at all about Islam. And in keeping with what you also said, the churches in Canada, which I think over 60 or so. And in fact, I was looking at all the quotes, and I'll read them to you from Justin Trudeau and others. I have it opened here. When those churches burned, most of them were Catholic, and supposedly it's about some 200-year-old graves that, natives who died in some kind of epidemic and were buried and now they were lost, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, when all these churches in Canada were burned, here's what Harsha Walea, the head of British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, of all things, this is what she said. She tweeted, "Burn it all down." And Heidi Matthews of Harvard Law School described the vandalization and torching of those schools as, quote, the right of resistance to extreme and systematic injustice. And of course, Trudeau said, quote, "I understand the anger that's out there against institutions like the Catholic Church. It is real and it is fully understandable given the shameful history that we're all becoming more and more aware of." So, when actual attacks on Christians happen, they just, whitewash it, brush it aside, justify it, say, oh, there's a reason for this. So we don't have a Christian phobia ambassador or representative in Canada or anywhere. And I was saying earlier, I connect this with what's happening in the UN. So in the UN, they made March 15th, I think last March 15th, they announced that March 15th from now on will be Combat Islamophobia Day. And they picked that date because March 15th, of course, is the attack on those two churches in New Zealand. I'm sorry, the two mosques in New Zealand, where I think 50 Muslims were killed. So this one instance or incident was enough for them to create a whole Islamophobia, combat Islamophobia, et cetera, et cetera. But as I chronicle and I document the persecution of Christians at the hands of Muslims every single month, and I've been doing that for over a decade. And I wrote an article, long story short, is I showed you that in just 10 years, there was something like 20 attacks on Christians by Muslims throughout the world, where you had on average something like 20, 30, 40, 50, in some cases 300 Christians were blown to bits. Okay. And what's more telling is, these attacks on Christian churches by Muslims happened in African nations, Arab nations, Iran, Turkey, Central Asia, Far East Asia, Sinic peoples, Indonesians, and so forth. And so what it tells you is there is a pattern here. It's not a cultural, racial, or economic, socio-economic thing. It's something that happens at the hands of Muslims to Christians. So there's a pattern. But the UN, of course, there's no combat Christianophobia, nothing like that. It doesn't even acknowledge it. Every single time one of these attacks happens, one just recently in the Congo, I think last month, where something like 60 Christians blown to pieces as they were celebrating a baptismal at the hands of Muslims. They don't connect the dots, and each one is, oh well, that's because of, believe it or not, things like climate change. These are the excuses they'll give. But when you get one very singular aberration, I mean, how many other times where a Western man goes into a mosque and slaughters 50 Muslims, as in the New Zealand example? That is a singular example, and there is no pattern. And so they try to show that, prop that up as a pattern. And then where there is a pattern, Muslims butchering Christians left and right, that they just completely downplay. And that is just one of many ways to prove that this is just a political agenda for them. They don't care about anything. It's just about, and when it comes to Trudeau and the whole general thing about Islamophobia is just shutting you up. Okay, it's just so people like me can't say what I'm saying. And facts and truth and history and doctrine gets suppressed because it's hate speech. This Trudeau, this new office that they opened, I think they're making it's being budgeted like $5 million. So that's a big operation for a country like Canada. And the long and short of it is going to have a massive chilling effect on free speech, which is already very much hampered in places like Canada and the USA. So you can imagine now that it's been officialized, and you have an Islamophobia czar or police to police your language, or you get in trouble. I don't know what the penalties are, jail or what. That's going to one more step to shut people
I'm sure
up.
we'll find out, Ray. I'm sure we'll find out what the penalties are. Go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off, brother.
No, that was it. That was it.
Yeah, Joe R., I could go on for so long about what Ray just said. I'm going to hand it over to you because I know my anger meter is going to go through the roof. So I might as well temper myself and hand it over to you.
Raymond, Trudeau's office, when they hired this advisor, basically said she's going to develop inclusive policies. What I don't understand is wokeism is the de facto religion of Canada. I don't know how the two could blend. I mean, inclusive policies to what? Transgenderism? I mean, Muslims are hardly going to embrace that. I don't even know how you could possibly blend the two. Break down that language, or is it just that language?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's language that's meant to just subvert reality. But in this case, I think what's happening is, yeah, you're right. Your average Muslim is not on board with, the LGB, whatever, acronym it is, and all that stuff. And they know that in Canada, but they're not worried about the Muslims. They're worried about shutting up the average Canadian. So language like inclusivity or inclusiveness, and all these terms are basically, they sound nice, right? They all sound nice, but what they mean is if you are critical of them or this religion or whatever, you're the bad guy and you're the one who gets canceled. Okay, so in the end, what it means is we're shutting you up. You either celebrate this, you either celebrate the trans thing, or you're not celebrating, being inclusive and whatever, and you're the bad guy. You're a monster, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all they have to fall back on. It's ridiculous. It's absurd, and I hope most people can see through it.
I wonder sometimes, Raymond Ibrahim joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. I wonder sometimes, do people look at history, Ray? When you see a revolution, ordinarily what you have is a coalition of revolutionaries that are fighting against whatever that thing might be. But then after they've succeeded, and we hope that these people don't, okay, then they turn on each other because that's necessary. The coalition to start the revolution was necessary. Then to purge the movement from dissonant elements, that has to take place also. Why do I say this? What do Muslims, let's take Muslims and their ideology. What do they think they're gaining from the left? They're against Muslims are against gay marriage. They're against abortion. They're against transgender ideology. They're against all this. Do they really think that they're not going to have to fight with others in their movement when and if their revolution is successful? Tell me where I'm wrong about this, Ray, because they're going to have to eventually turn on one another. Am I wrong about that?
No, I mean, I always answer this kind of question by quoting the age-old axiom, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So to your average Muslim in Canada and to your average leftist liberal nut job in Canada, yeah, obviously they're definitely on a trajectory to clash. But at the moment, they're both minorities, essentially. It's the Canadian people, the general average Canadian, or you can use the same analogy here in the US. It's the same thing. So, but the Muslims have a lot to gain from these leftists because they're the ones who, for example, by bringing in or introducing this word Islamophobia and creating a whole office to police it, well, that's good for Muslims, especially, I don't mean the average Muslim, I mean the ones that mean to do ill and terrorists and so forth. Because within this Islamophobia kind of policing is going to be a lot less scrutiny of Muslims. So if there's a Muslim who's engaged in possible terrorist activity, I guarantee you the law enforcement is going to be terrified of really pursuing him too much because that's going to be Islamophobic. Okay, so they're definitely, and then all the other benefits that the minority receives from this sort of cover, in this case in Islamophobia. But sure, I mean, you're talking about a future down the line where it's just the leftists and the Muslims. But also in that, I think you'll be surprised they have a lot more in common than you think. Obviously not on the theological aspect, but in many ways that's just a veneer for these certain impulses. Totalitarian thinking, for example, which both groups it's in it. So they could even theoretically find an alliance. But I don't think that's really an issue for anyone at this point because it's neither here nor there. They're the enemy. My enemy is my friend, and they're just because they're both the minorities in this sense. They're going to work together and then sort it all out once the normal people are gone.
So it's realpolitik. That's
Yeah.
is really what it comes down to. And again, that's why I asked the question, Ray Ibrahim Jr. said at the front line with Joe and Joe, is that it'll be interesting if any of us are around. We hope that we are, okay? Because obviously we are their enemy, and they've all come together. And I guess that's what it is. I would try to emphasize to a Muslim, these people are not your friends. You are, and Joe, we are actually your friends. We are tolerant, okay? As Catholics, as Christians, we're more tolerant than they are because if they gain real power, you're in trouble. And then they're going to have to
Let me tell you real
quick.
Let me tell you real quick. Muslims, and I'm talking about now your average Muslim, despise with vehemence the leftist agenda. They hate, forget about LGBT. They just hate homosexuality. I mean, that is to them an abomination. Okay. So when you want to talk about a conservative people, Muslims are very, very conservative. They're how Europeans were maybe 2 centuries ago or more. So yeah, they don't have anything in common ideologically at all. Okay, but that's why, for example, we saw in the U.S. I think it was in Dearborn when there was some school meeting, and Dearborn, of course, has got a lot of Muslims, and they just went ballistic on the administrators with all this pushing, gay, trans stuff on little kids. I mean, very vocal, very animated, which I think was great. And I've been asked by more than one Christian, you know, why aren't we like that? Why do we passively let it go by? So there's definitely that aspect to keep in mind. But like I said, it's like you said, it's real politique at this point.
Absolutely. Joe R.
Raymond, how are the Canadians going to handle that when their community, the Muslim community, basically does exactly what you just described that happened in Dearborn, Michigan? I mean, they're not going to tolerate basically grooming children at a young age, um, with the idea that a boy could become a girl and a girl could become a boy. I mean, like, how do you then basically navigate that politically? I mean, I just don't understand again how Canada, which is far more woke than America, could put on this facade and people could buy it. Um, I mean,
Yeah.
I really don't know how they're going to navigate that.
I mean, there's a lot of wishful thinking on the Muslims get it, and they'll participate in it as much as it's good for them. Okay, the people who are promulgating this, I think what it comes down to, and again, it's very similar to what I said about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. To the leftists, they just hate Christianity, they hate traditionalism, they hate conservatism, they just despise it. That's their enemy. Okay, so don't tell me about Muslims stoning homosexuals. That's so distant to them. The thing that's real, that's in the now, that they live and they hate is that. So all of these questions, as legitimate as they are sort of put on the side burner, kind of we'll deal with it when we get there. But at this point, what we really hate, what we want to undermine is Christian civilization.
Well, why do we shy away from confronting that, Ray?
Because we're wimps.
Why is it that Christians are so quick to just crawl back under their holes and say we can't argue against that because we'll be Islamophobic or whatever? Why are we so cowardly? The Catholic Church. I'm sorry to our Protestant brothers and sisters. I am. I don't want to exclude you. The Catholic Church has known this for centuries, going back to the beginning. Why are we so cowardly now, Ray?
Well, I think because whether you're a Christian or a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever, most people in the United States or in the West in general, Canada and so forth, are just indoctrinated in leftist thinking. You don't have to be a woke maniac to still imbibe so much liberalism, as we used to call it. Okay, and I think people have been so indoctrinated with or taught not to be confrontational. I don't want to be a savage and get up like those Muslims in Dearborn and yell and scream and get passionate. I want to do it properly. I'm going to go vote for the right guy. And as we see, that doesn't really work. So I think people have been sort of pacified and almost paralyzed into not acting and not doing anything and not getting crazy because that's not cool. You definitely want to maintain some decorum and not be primitive and be sophisticated. So I think all of those have just made a lot of Western men and women cowards. Bottom line, because the things that we're seeing right now are just just beyond disgusting. I mean, as you know, I don't even remember the titles, but all these books of literature that used to be the bedrock of Western liberal education are now being attacked and canceled and banned because of one word that might offend someone who's obese or whatever the case is. I mean, this is for a culture to exist, all we care about now is not offending someone, and everything else has to be shut off and shut off. Well, that's you're headed for a lot of trouble. And the only way to combat it is to really combat it and not sit behind a keyboard and argue and hashtag or whatever these sorts of things. I mean, I share your frustration, as you can see, but it's what it is, and unless people do something about it, it's going to continue.
Well, I think what we're doing, you on your end, okay, Raymond Ibrahim, joining us at the front line with Joe and Joe. What we're doing, we're speaking up. I guess to speak nowadays is a counter-revolutionary act because you would think that we're not talking about picking up swords or guns or anything like that. Just simply to speak is a revolutionary act against the current woke establishment. Ray, we have time for one more question. I'm going to hand it over to Joe.
Right, just give everyone a little bit of a taste of your books. I think that's very important because I think you have a lot of good stuff out there that'll educate people. I think that's the grounding of the next step is first we have to get educated. Tell us about your books.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, people can't really, respond without knowing something, right? And speaking of history, so that's what my book's about, and they're very pertinent to what we're talking about because they dealt with the opposite. They dealt with very brave Western men. So my last book, which came out a few months ago, is called "Defenders of the West: The Christian Heroes Who Stood Against Islam," and I basically chronicle various heroes, historical, and their wars and battles with invading Islam. Muslims in Spain, Muslims in the Balkans, Romania, Hungary, and so forth, and also the Holy Land. And also before that, a couple of years ago, was Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West. And I think that'll give you the groundwork, and you'll see that what I just said, because I can imagine so much of what I said seems, over the top to people who are not familiar, but it'll document with about 1,000 footnotes and endnotes that Islam has been hostile to and at war with the West since its inception. And I think once you read that, and you understand it, and the more recent book might even inspire people, as I understand, Defenders of the West. It'll give you a better idea and better ammo to really, figuratively speaking, kind of combat what we're dealing with right now.
And so I think about it this way. We want to be, of course, tolerant. We're Catholic men. We want to be loving and we want to be understanding. But that doesn't mean that we don't argue ideas, okay, in the free marketplace of ideas. And we need to have these conversations. And that's exactly, Ray, what you're talking about, is that we can't even have them.
Yeah.
Is that they tell us, if you question, let's say, the history of the relationship, just saying, between Islam and the Catholic Church, oh my God, you're a hater.
Yeah.
You can't talk about those things.
And
And
a word to Christians. Go ahead.
No, please.
Okay, so we're talking about Christians. Unfortunately, there's the kind of Christianity that's popular today is what I call doormat Christianity, and it permeates all the major denominations, which is basically, it's a heresy in the sense that it's just taken one part of the teachings of the gospel, Jesus' words, basically the passive forgiving stuff. But Jesus, I mean, man, you want to talk about offensive language? Look at what Jesus said to people, calling them snakes and vipers, and you're going to go to hell, and gnashing of teeth and so forth, and calling on them to repent, and they're sinners. Okay, so even Jesus himself, was bold with the truth and confronted evil and called it out for what it was. But unfortunately, too many Christians don't think who am I to judge? And that's not the point. We're not talking about judging an individual. We're talking about setting up a social order and laws and reason and logic. So the Christian tradition, whether it's just war theory or what I just discussed with Jesus, is very in your face and not apologetic, and not in a mean spirit and somehow to fat shame, as it were, but it doesn't shy away from speaking the truth, no matter how unpopular. And I think that's what Christians in general, and Westerners in general, actually should be cognizant of and start to employ more of.
No, absolutely. Ray, we have to let you go because we're on a time limit, but please tell our audience, where could they learn more about what you have going on, your books, social media, the whole 9 yards?
Sure. Probably the best place is my website, which has my books, links to my books. It has my links to my social media, and has all my articles and videos and whatever I do, really. And it's Raymond Ibrahim, RaymondiBrahim.com.
And we encourage all of our audience members, please follow Ray. He's a voice of reason in all of this chaos. And hopefully, Ray, we are too. Joe and I are trying to be as best we can. Okay.
No,
but we have to remember, our Christian faith is based on reason. We're trying to reason our way through these things.
The word logos, which everyone knows, in the Gospel of John, that's where we get our word logic. No.
Yes.
And now we have a war on logic. So it's a war on the logos.
And you know what? That's what sometimes we have to rest on. Ultimately, we have to rest on Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. We know that. But when we're talking to people who don't believe that, I'm glad you brought up logos. We have to rely on logic, reason, rationality. That's where we're arguing from. Not an argument because we want to win it. Argument because we have to arrive at truth. Ray Ibrahim, you are our brother. We're so happy you came on the show, and we look forward to having many, many, many more conversations with you. Thank you, brother. We appreciate it.
For sure. Thank you, Joe and Joe. Take care.
Absolutely, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, Ray.
Joe, so true. I'm going to throw it over to you for a second. So true what Ray was saying. I'd like your thoughts on and to finalize that conversation.
Well, I think the idea that there's just a double standard. 67 churches burned down. We don't see a special advisor in Canada that's talking to the administration and the people about Christianity being brutalized, and it is. Um, Listen, no one should be brutalized.
Sure.
God proposes, he does not impose. With that said, government has no right to basically oppress ideas, particularly people's religious beliefs. Um, and frankly, like I said, it's just a double standard, and I just think it's hypocritical, and it's just typical of what's going on in woke Canada.
Well, that's what we have to point out, Joe Rossinello, at the front line with Joe and Joe, is that they want to pick and choose their allies. As Ray was saying, okay, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But I would say this, Joe, as a Catholic man, and I think you would agree with me. What I would appeal to the Muslim man, okay, is logos. Is that we have to appeal to order, rationality, okay? The fact that the left offers you nothing. If they're trying to tell you that Christianity is your enemy, okay, I'm not the enemy of the Muslim, nor are you. I don't agree with Islamic theology, okay? I don't agree with any of that, okay? However, and Joe, we have members of our family who are Islamic, okay, in on the in-law level, okay. I love them. I would never ever try to suggest that they haven't come to their conclusions in their own way. I'm going to argue for the Catholic faith, but I'm going to do it in a very respectful and loving way, okay. And offer what the church proposes as the truth, and then you can have a discussion. But what's going on now, Joe, is not that. Okay. What's going on now, again, with the left and the radical Islamists is a coalition that I have a very hard time seeing can coexist with one another. Because if they were to win, if they were actually to win the revolution, the culture war, they're gonna be slugging it out on their end because they cannot coexist. Joe, one final comment from you, and then I want to segue.
Well, I think you're right. And that's why I basically brought that up to raise attention. I mean, clearly there seems to be a conflict there. I don't know how basically you could have inclusive policies uh, in a government like Canada and basically somehow bridge that with Islam. Islamic families that are extremely traditional. Forget about the religious beliefs, just traditional and conservative. It doesn't make sense, and frankly, people who have eyes should basically see that.
Well, Joe, they need to open their eyes. Now, here's the thing. We are on a path towards annihilation. I think if anybody doesn't see that, I think they're blind, Joe. I think they got their head in the sand. I really do. Joe, we're not fatalists here at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello, way in the breach. We're not fatalists. We know that humanity progresses forward. Okay. But you have a strain of some ideology in the world that's fatalist. They hate humanity. They hate themselves. Now it could be the transgender movement and a whole bunch of movements out there. They really, Joe, are have imbibed the ideas of Satan, which is we should hate ourselves. It's scary to think about, but we had on Father Robert McTeague because he wrote an article in Crisis Magazine, and we would encourage all of you out there to go and read it because it's true, Joe. It's true. All right. A brief history of annihilation. Joe, let me tell you something. Humanity can argue with itself back and forward. Okay. Atheists, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, all sorts of people. I never seen a level of hatred towards ourselves that I'm seeing now. So I want to show an interview that Joe and I did with Father Robert McTeague talking about this very thing. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. All right. So thanks again for joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. We're in the breach with Father Robert McTeague. Okay. Now, Joe, sometimes there's articles written and things like that where the title just gets you. You got to read what this is about. Well, Father McTeague, he wrote an article in Crisis Magazine. The title just blew me away. A Brief History of Our Annihilation. And I got to say, when you think about it, yeah, I mean, and that's what we're going to talk about with Father McTeague. It's like, are we seriously annihilating ourselves? We're Catholic men. We're trying to fight against this, but the world seems very content to annihilate itself. Father McTeague, many of you know him out there. He is a member of the U.S. Eastern Province of the Society of Jesus. He's a professor of philosophy and theology. He's a member of the National Ethics Committee of the Catholic Medical Association. He's written numerous books like Real Philosophy for Real People and Christendom Lost and Found. A lot of stuff. Don't Father McTeague's bio. I encourage you all to follow everything he does, but we only have a limited amount of time. We want to talk about a brief history of our annihilation. Father McTeague, thanks for coming back to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Hey, I'm glad to be working with you guys again. We got to fight the good fight together.
Absolutely. Joe Resinello, let's get started.
Father, I just want to read one line and then you let us have it because it's
Sure.
bold. And ultimately, Catholics need to be bold, and Father is bold. So we invite all our listeners to follow him. This is what you said. I don't like where we're headed. We're running out of goods to reject or destroy. We're almost at the point of no return. It doesn't get more bold than that, Father. Where are we going? Tell us.
Well, I've been following the human condition closely as a priest, as a religious, as a scholar. And now that I've been broadcasting for almost 5 years on the Catholic Current via the Station of the Cross, I really have to follow what the trends are. And what I'm seeing is a progressive and aggressive state of decline, a state of decay. I said we can trace a story arc going as far back as Martin Luther, the 1500s, rejecting the church. But where we are in the end game now, as I said, we're running out of things to reject and destroy. So we've rejected Christ, we've rejected the church, we've rejected the Creator, we've rejected what sex and marriage really mean, we've rejected female, we've rejected our future by contraception and abortion. We are rejecting our past by either composting our dead or destroying our monuments. The only thing left is for the dissatisfied, implacable self to consume even more that it should be growing rather than consuming. So what's left is we're reducing our children now to sexual consumables by trying to normalize pedophilia, calling it minor attracted persons. And then we're also rejecting our species. There are people say they're not only in the wrong body, they're in the wrong species, or the species needs an upgrade through transhumanism. So what we're doing is mirroring the Luciferian rejection of God as God and creature as creature. And we've been checking things off the list. There's very little left at this point.
Father McTeague, here's the thing. I don't like when someone who is so obsessed. You said the unsatisfied self, or the dissatisfied self. So you go through all these procedures, and I guess miraculously you're now satisfied with yourself. Do you just sit there after all this, after you've mutilated yourself, you've destroyed your body, you've destroyed your soul? Do you just sit there and you wonder to yourself, "Wow, I'm really satisfied now"? In other words, completely obsessed with the thing that you did. Or what usually I think that the science is bearing this out. No, what happens is you what you are becoming aware of is you've wrecked yourself, and now you've done irreparable damage. Talk about that a little bit, Father. This idea of the unsatisfied self.
I mean, ultimately, what we're looking at is a preview of what hell is. Hell is the isolated, individual, unsatisfied, implacable self, incapable of love, incapable of charity, incapable of empathy. So you've got this raging appetite that can never be put to rest. You're constantly going to look for someone to blame, to destroy, and ultimately devour, while resolutely choosing not to turn to God. So I think what we're seeing in these days really is a dress rehearsal for what hell looks like. And we need to be, as you said, bold and talk about this very starkly and very clearly. And I say this not for clickbait. I don't like talking about this. I had a vision I was going to be some quiet academic, teach a few classes, write a few books. It didn't work out that way in God's providence. We are on a very aggressive decline. We are in the tailspin of a spiritual warfare, and people need to wake up while there's still time.
I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but I think that's the thing. You used the word aggressive. The nauseating line up until about 5 minutes ago was, well, I'll do me, you do you. Okay. Which is
No, not
bad
anymore.
enough.
Yeah,
But
that's
now
bad
it's
enough.
no, I'll do me and you'll do me too.
Right.
Okay. Because you have to accept what I say reality is. And
Not
it's so
just
muddled.
accept, but participate. You know, so you not only have to call me by the right pronoun or name of the day, you have to treat me accordingly. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the stories too. You know, men are haters because they won't date men who are calling themselves women now.
I saw that.
So
That's
it's not
insane.
enough to approve. You have to participate, and you're the villain if you don't.
I'm going to hand it over to Joe. One quick comment that I think is sad. This guy, Sam Smith, from what I understand, he's actually a baptized Catholic. It was nauseating to my core to see him in an interview. And again, this is him trying to train young people's minds. But he kept talking about the fact that he loves fishing and he loves being a fisher them. And I'm just sitting there and I'm going like this, because that's all I could do. But that's what they want. They want kids watching that show and then seeing, oh, that's the way we use pronouns. Anyway, we got a lot to get to. Joe Resinello.
Right.
Father, ultimately, we were all made by God to love him, to serve him, and to be with him in eternity. And I always say to people, the laws of God apply to you whether you acknowledge him or not. But sadly, we're experiencing, particularly in the West, and that includes America, my friends, there's a human rejection of God. It's as clear as the day is long. Now, why does that always lead to nihilism? It can't go any other place than nihilism. Please explain it to us as a philosopher.
Well, you know, it's analogous to, you know, what is the sin against the Holy Spirit, the unforgivable sin? It's the absolute rejection of life and love. If you're going to reject the author of reality, who is all good, all wise, loving, providential, who by his very nature can only want the best for us, and what is best for us is himself. If you're rejecting that, what else is there? You know, Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, he was a madman, but he wasn't stupid. And I'm paraphrasing, he said, the people in the West aren't willing to own the awful fact that they have killed and rejected God. So we wanted to have some vague social contract. You know, why can't we all just get along and not cannibalize each other? But we also wanted to be absent from God's accountability. And we also wanted to be involved in perversions of the natural law. And God was in the way of that. So for the sake of perversion and for the sake of a diabolical absolute autonomy, we were willing to, quote unquote, kill God, which of course we can't do. But then we weren't able to own it. So rather than go right into nihilism, we tried all these other things. Let's try modernism. That we were going to save ourselves. World War I comes. That was a bloody mess. Existentialism. Well, that's just posturing, and even that's too dark. Postmodernism. But who can take that seriously? You know, everything is relative until you want to put up a building. Then 2 and 2 has to equal 4. So, you know, as Ayn Rand said, you can reject reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of rejecting reality.
Well, and Joe says that on the show all the time. If you don't believe in gravity, jump off a building. You'll believe in it before you hit you'll believe in it before you hit the pavement. Okay.
Right.
And we're trying to, we're out there, we're in the breach. Father Robert McTee's joined us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. We're discussing his article, A Brief History of Our Annihilation. Please, everybody, this is a brief condensed version of that. We encourage all of you to go and read the article, and you can read that at Crisis Magazine. Yeah, you want to reject reality, but then you want me to bear the consequences of your rejected reality. Now, if you're going to do it, I don't want that for you. I don't. Okay. And we're going to preach from the rooftops that you are on a bad road, my friend. All right. But if you're going to do it, you're not going to drag me. More importantly, you're not going to drag our kids down with you. Okay. If you're going to hell, you're not taking us. All right. That's the bottom line. Let me ask you this. You mentioned cannibalism, Father McTeague. What is narcissistic cannibalism? Can you talk about that with our audience?
Well, narcissism is a self-obsession. Right. But now remember, we're not just talking about someone who is prideful, someone who's always walking around looking into the mirror thinking that I'm lovely and grand. A narcissistic cannibalism is the dissatisfied, unsatisfied self. Because remember, this is a self that has rejected all the benefits and resources of reality, including the true story of good and evil, has destroyed the possibility of even the natural happiness of relationships. And then there is an aching incompleteness, which is really meant to be an indication of our natural desire for God. But we've rejected that. That hunger doesn't go away. So we begin to turn on our own. Like I said, we destroy the future, and then we also consume the future. We destroy the past and we consume the past. Self, trying to engorge ourselves by everyone submitting to my will, my sovereign will. Imagine a toddler with nuclear weapons and hands on the lever of culture, and that's where we are now. The toddler is screaming because he can't stuff enough into his mouth, and that's where we are right now.
Father McTeague, I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but I have a quick question.
Sure.
I can understand being tempted to do sinful things. I get that. Okay.
Yeah.
Being tempted towards lust or all these things. How is it possible for a human being to be tempted into destroying themselves? Because that I don't understand. Unless the person has a psychological problem, what brings a person to hate not only themselves, but all of humanity so much?
Well, it's a rage. It's a rejection of love. It's a rejection of creator and your status as a creature. Glenn Tinder, Tinder, wrote a book called Against Fate, an essay on personal dignity. He said, fate is what happens when you reject creaturehood. Destiny is what happens when you accept it. You can explain a lot of human history with just those two questions. Put that on your reading list for sure. But ultimately, it's a rejection of God. It's a refusal to be loved.
Okay, well, thank you for that, because I think that's, that's the mind that thinks that
Right.
is a very sad one indeed.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
Father
yes,
Robin
yes,
McTeague joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Please go and read his article at Crisis Magazine. Read all his stuff, by the way. All right, and we're not just saying that because he's a friend of the show. I mean, you want to be enlightened, you want to be equipped to fight this culture war, to fight this spiritual battle. We need to be reading our good priests like Father McTeague, our thinkers in the church that are enlightening us, raising our consciousness as to what's going on out there. Please go to Crisis Magazine and read this article, A Brief History of Our Annihilation. Joe Rossinello.
Father, I want to get your take on something, particularly around the summer of 2020. You mentioned the narcissist. This is what I think is taking place, and I'm interested in your opinion. I think it's projection of self-hatred. I think what we're seeing is people, you see, as Catholics, listen, we're sinners. I'm a sinner. I go to confession twice a month because I'm a sinner. But we have a place to put our sin. Right. There is no place outside of Christ, particularly the Catholic Church and the confessional, to put your sin. Therefore, it's projected on the other. Is that what we're seeing in the culture right now?
Yes, I think you're onto something really important, Joe. When we realize that we have failed, that we have underlived our lives, and we have no moral imagination to conceive of healing and mercy and forgiveness, and I mean real mercy. None of this, I'll just wave my magic wand and say sin doesn't count. That's not godly mercy at all. But when we have precluded the possibility of knowing Christ as Redeemer and as Savior, we've got this toxic shame running around that can't be contained. And we can't bring to bear it, to put it on ourselves, so we project it out onto others. And again, this is all a dress rehearsal for hell. This is what hell is going to look like forever and without limit. A rejection of love and a rage and a hunger that blames everyone, wants to consume everyone, and is never satisfied.
It's again, Father, the only thing that comes to my mind is sadness more than more than anything else, is because the soul that rejects God. I mean, it's one thing. I have atheist friends. I talk to them, be it former Catholics, things like that. But they don't reject. I mean, they're normal. They come to their atheism how they have, but they don't reject some sort of objective morality. I know that might sound a little contradictory. These people are off the rails. My atheist friends aren't for abortion on demand up to the moment of birth, or calling boys girls and girls boys. This stuff is really off the rails. One thing I want to say is this, or ask you about, is this. The tellers of this tale, this is you ended your article this way. Mm-hmm. The tellers of this tale may be human, but its author is a spirit, namely Satan. Yeah. As much as we cannot reject the existence of God, Father McTeague, we cannot reject the existence of Satan. Please talk about that.
You know, when you watch bad fantasy movies or bad science fiction, towards the end of the movie, there's always some sagacious figure that says, well, no, you can't really have good without evil. They go together. It's completely backwards. You can't have evil without good. You can't have evil without a standard that it falls short of. So when we talk about evil, we are implicitly acknowledging a good that triumphs. So the problem of evil is a fact of evil that is ultimately resolved in God and in his Christ. But if we reject Satan, if we reject evil, then what are we doing on Good Friday? What are we doing at Mass? What has nearly all of Christian iconography meant? If it's just a bit of melodrama on God's part, then it's not really very interesting. I have an immortal soul that is worth contesting for, and so do you. We have to be clear about that, or we're going to be eaten alive.
No, absolutely. Joe Rossinello, we got about 2 minutes for a final question for Father Robert McTeague.
Father, the battle lines have been drawn in America. Our country is deeply divided. Why is it more spiritual than political?
Well, you know, politics comes and goes, and the church has seen kingdoms and empires and republics rise and fall for centuries. And, you know, Aristotle said, if this life is all there is, then politics is the greatest discipline. Ultimately, we're contesting for souls. We're contesting for eternity. The battlefield might be political, but the battle is certainly spiritual. We have to be involved as citizens. We have to be concerned about law and justice, et cetera, et cetera. But boy, we got to keep our eyes on the end zone. It's about victory with Christ, restoring creation to the Father. That's the game that's being played, not who gets to divide the pie for the next 2 to 4 years in Washington.
Well, along those lines, I mean, being that we have a little bit of time left, why is it then? Let's keep it with conservatives for a second. Both those who are Catholic conservative and evangelical conservative, okay, they agree with us on most things. Let's say abortion, the pro-life, pro-family. You know, I'm not criticizing that, but they're looking for political messiahs. And I voted for Donald Trump twice. I'm going to shout that from the rooftop. But he's not a messiah. And we're
the psalmist said, do not put your trust in princes. Look, there is something wrong with the human heart that only grace can heal and not legislation. And we forget that at our peril in this life and in the next.
Absolutely. Father McTeague, you know, it's always enlightening to have you on the show to talk about these things. Of course, we're going to, always be in contact with you, and we're going to have you on as frequently as we can. All of you out there who are listening to us, whether YouTube, Twitter, the whole nine yards, remember, Father McTeague is the host and producer of The Catholic Current, and you could get that on the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Father, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
God bless you. Good work. Look forward to next time.
Thank you, Father. You know, Joe, a lot of times people will say, you guys are too Catholic. Father McTeague just laid it out. I don't care if you are a person who recognizes Logos. We had someone in our chat room who said, you guys ought to talk to E. Michael Jones. We already did. We already talked about
Few
logos. We
times.
get another thing is too. We get logos. We get it. Okay, and I would argue that there are many people out there in America who are not necessarily Catholic. Okay, and they understand logos also. But logos, as Father McTeague was trying to say, the battlefield for logos is politics. But that's not the be all and end all. It's politics, it's culture, it's the way we live our lives. Okay. The way we actually get out there. Do we live our lives, Joe, in America? Do we adapt our lives to logos? We try. We're not judgmental towards other people, you and I at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're not. We understand that life is hard. Temptation is difficult. We have to overcome that. But we recognize and strive to live according to Logos, who is Christ himself. Okay. And even if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, you still recognize Logos. And if you want to save America, get us back on the right track, Joe, I think the first step is recognizing order, objective morality, and all of that. I want your opinion on that before we move forward.
Well, I love Father Robert. I'll be honest
Oh,
with you.
it's
He's a
awesome.
true son of Saint Ignatius. He is a fantastic priest. He is not afraid, and he calls it like he sees it. I mean, one of the most gripping statements that he makes, I mean, it jumped out at me right off the page. Is this is resembling what hell will be like? Hell is real. I mean, it's real, and we're seeing this. I mean, I say this to people all the time. You tell a tree by the fruit it bears. These ideas are not working. They're simply not working. Well, I don't care who you voted for. Look out your window. Look at what's going on. People say, oh, there's always been problems. Listen, yes, there have been problems. But you know something? We're getting some really basic stuff wrong. And society is frankly not functioning. It's completely broken down. If you can't see that, if you won't admit that, frankly, I don't know what to tell you. Um, and you know, I think as many people we've talked to say, and I would agree with them. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't think we're even at near the bottom yet, Joe.
Well, I guess I look at it this way. You know, the Lord said to Abraham, or Abraham said to the Lord, Lord, if you find 50, will you still destroy it? He said, no, I won't. What if you find 40? I won't. What if you find 30? I won't. What if you find 10? I won't. I agree with you. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is we're not there yet. Okay. Where you can't find 10 good people in America, relatively speaking. Okay. There's a lot of good people in America who are fighting the good fight. What we have to do is encourage people to say, we have to step up. Stop worrying about whether or not you get invited to the cocktail party. Your family might not like you anymore. I'm sorry to say that. I have family members that don't want to hear what me and my wife have to talk about as far as abortion and everything else. I'm sorry that you might not want to have me at your house. But we have to step up and say, what is more important? And we're placing, Joe, our importance on things that don't matter. Okay? To say my comfort. Well, I want to go over to my family member's house because I want to have Thanksgiving. It might not work out that way. They might not want you there. And we have to confront that, Joe. It's uncomfortable. It sucks. Let's put it like that. It sucks. But guess what? If you adhere to the truth, okay, you're not necessarily going to be invited to the party nowadays. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, that's very true. I mean, ultimately, the way I look at it, you got to take a side in this life, but you also have to love people. The way I also see it is this: my door is always open. Um, it really is. But I'm not going to change who I am. I have to be true to myself. I have to be true to my religion. And Christ says this very clearly. If you don't acknowledge his word now, his father won't acknowledge you. I mean, we got to take that, you know, on the surface. He's serious about that. That doesn't mean you beat people over the head, but if someone asks you about an opinion, you got to speak your mind. You got to be true to yourself. And ultimately, that doesn't mean you have to hate people. You could be kind. You could, you know, my door is open for anybody. At the end of the day, whether they want to come in it or not is their business.
Joe, I would say this to you. I want to play a clip because I want to end on a lighter note, okay? But I want to play a clip. But here's the thing I would say. I would say to anybody who says we are not inclusive, you could come into my house, but I bet my bottom dollar that you won't invite me into yours. I would say that to Sam Smith, Madonna, all these people who are all liberated and blah, blah, blah. You won't invite me into your house. You are the ones who are not inclusive because you will not include me. And as you said, Joe, our door is open. I would bet, again, yours is not. Now, we got to end with, Joe, I don't want to pick on Joe Biden. I don't. I actually feel sorry for him. And as a Catholic man, I would say he's old. He's lost his mind. He's being used and manipulated by the powers that be amongst the globalists, the George Soros types, the elitists, all of them, the Democrat Party. Joe, we got to play this clip. This guy's gone. We have to pray for him and pray that he no longer occupies the Oval Office. So, John, let's play the clip.
No Srent, Badakefker, my boss been wet, Palmas, Truinder Dash Dubba Depressure. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, today I am going to teach you how to speak Bidenese. I'm going to teach you a few words and then we'll get the proper pronunciation and context from the master himself, President Joe Biden. The first word I'm going to teach you today is Nexnosrent. Nexnosrent. President Biden will now demonstrate this word for us.
Donald Trump does pose an excellent threat to this. It's not hypothetical.
It's not hypothetical. Nexnosrent. Okay, the next word we've got is Badakefker. Badakefker. Say it. Try it. Badakefker. President Biden.
Barack and I think it's a right for people to have bad care.
Next, my bus been wet. Now, a common error on this one is people put the stress on the wrong syllable. It's not my bus been wet. It's not my bus been wet. It's my bus been wet. Say it. My bus been wet.
My bus been wet.
Next, we have a word that's much simpler. Palmist. Palmist. Can you say palmist? President Biden, palmist.
And if we do, and I'm sure we can proclaim the palmist with the palmist who wrote these following words.
All right, now that you've got 4 words in the bag, we're going to move on to a really complex Bidenese word. Do you think you're ready for it? You're going to really have to pay attention here. This is sort of advanced level Bidenese. Very long word, okay? This is what it is. It's a very long word. Are you ready? Truinder dash dubba depressure. Truinder dash dubba depressure. One word. One word. Truinder dash dubba depressure. Say it a little more quickly. Truinder dash dubba depressure. Truinder dash dubba depressure. President Biden, go.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
Truinder dash dubba depressure. You got.
I can't. I love that guy. By the way, you know he's going to end up on the FBI terrorist list.
Probably. His phone will be taken soon.
Yes, he will. He's going to be imprisoned, called all sorts of names. Maybe they're going to bring back tar and feathering, perhaps public executions, because he pointed out that Biden is just, the dude just got. Joe, we got about 30 seconds. What's your last thoughts?
Psalmist. That's all I have to say.
Palmist.
Oh my god.
That's David, dude. That's David. He's
dude, I listen to these clips. I say to myself, this guy is the president of the United States. It's not even, I'll be truthful, in all honesty, you could find a clip like that at least one a week.
Easy.
At least one a week. It's nuts. It's really nuts. And frankly, it says, listen, Joe Biden, sadly, is a figurehead. He's a puppet. Again, like him or not, whether you voted for him or not, let's accept the reality. Joe Biden is an old man. And frankly, he's not up for the job. I'm sorry.
Well, let's see what happens in the future. Joe Rossinello, this has been a great conversation at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello went way into the breach tonight. Please follow us wherever you see us, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, share if you like what we do, and do all that fun stuff. And remember, until the next conversation, that our conversation is your conversation, and that one's going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.